Thank you. All right.
No, no, that's why I was waiting before we got on YouTube.
Exactly. All
I mean,
right. So we are live on YouTube right now with Bruce Rawles and Lynn Johnson, and we are reading the book of Symphony of Love. It's the uh, compilation of stories and uh, uh, poems and all sorts of stuff about and autobiographies of Ken Wapnick. And so I'm very excited about reading this book and
Hmm.
really enjoyed last week. Um, and let me see. And oh, hey, Marissa, good to see you. My goodness. All right.
Yes, yes.
Yes, yes.
And everyone attending. I have a highlight as my bookmark since I'm I'm reading the digital version. And I think we got as far as my autobiography, One My Life with God. Is that where we left off?
Let me see here. Just trying to get us up and going on.
Or did
Uh,
I highlight the wrong thing? Oh, you know what? I think I
let's
put
see.
also in
We'll
my
see.
calendar.
Because I done I done marked it right here.
So it's
There it is, where we left off.
should we back up a paragraph?
Sure.
Okay.
All right,
So
my life with, oh yeah, we were going to start here. Why did that move over there?
yeah.
Anyway, while
Yeah.
you are
Okay.
starting to
So
read, I'm gonna just
autobiography one, My Life with God. So really most of it was just preliminary stuff. So we're really kind of getting a start on the first autobiography today. So if anyone didn't miss last week, we're really getting going now in earnest today. So autobiography one, My Life with God. I've been asked to write about my life, to tell the story of how I came to be the person I am now. The purpose of this autobiography, as I understand it, is to demonstrate to others that God is very much active in our world. I think he's obviously meaning in our mental world, and that he is present even in the most unlikely and unexpected of circumstances. As I'm concerned here only with God's presence in my life and how, over the years, I came to know him, the external happening of my 31 years are unimportant and will be brought up only to provide the framework for the internal events as they developed. So this is a full, looks like a 40 years prior to Ken's passing, since I think he lived till about 71. The inner thread linking these events, which only recently has become apparent to me, is able to connect seemingly unrelated occurrences and renders explicable behavior and experiences which otherwise might seem peculiar. And I think we talked a bit last week about how if we look at all the events in our lives that seem unrelated in the context of a grander picture, that we don't see uh, on the battleground, so to speak, we get a more of an astronaut's perspective, and suddenly things from the Holy Spirit or Jesus' perspective start to make sense. So I think Ken is already uh, sharing how that we need to take a broader view of things that only can be had from outside of space and time, or metaphorically above the battleground, right?
yeah, yeah, and Ken was really very intelligent and very astute and very
Oh, extremely, yeah.
aware of his own thinking.
Hmm.
So I'm sure that he was seeing what we would call coincidences or uh, synchronicities in things that he could see there was he was moving through something that was consequential.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah,
Yeah, and he also, I think, as does the course, remind us that the real genius or brilliance is not prowess in the sense of strength over, it's strength with, um, and that's, I think, something the course really reminds us on every page, that if we try to do it on our own, we're really playing into the ego's hand instead of Holy Spirit's undoing program. Should I continue?
Yeah, continue. I'm
Okay.
just checking to make sure the radio's working.
Okay.
I'm doing all my little checks.
I picture you sort of like in a submarine, with a massive control panel and thousands of knobs and levers and valves and switches and blinking lights and
That's
all,
it.
all your streaming services that are simultaneously uh, sending our voices out into the ether.
Exactly. Yep. And it's like my own little TARDIS here.
Yeah,
So
there you go. Okay. So Ken continues, I was born of Jewish parents in 1942 and grew up in Brooklyn, New York. Um, hence his accent. By far the most significant figure of my early childhood was my maternal grandfather, who died when I was 6.5 years old. My clearest and most pleasant memories of those early years belong to him, and his death was a near catastrophic experience for me. So much that my grandfather was probably the last person I ever drew that closely to again. What made his loss even more painful and difficult was that the family was almost equally as affected, for he had been the pillar of us all. In about a year after my grandfather's death, my father developed tuberculosis, which necessitated his being away from home for a year. He soon after suffered a relapse, which required him to be on best red at home for several additional months. Shortly after this, my mother had the first of several hospitalizations, that's a long word, and or bed rests for an extremely severe skin condition. My insecurity in those years was manifest in the stuttering which began shortly after my father's death and recurring nightmares in which an activity would suddenly be interrupted and I would be thrown into a giant whirlpool, spun around wildly and completely out of control. I'm going to pause there. I'm talking about just as an aside, Ken's stuttering because I've I never did get to meet Ken in person, but I think I've listened to enough of his audios and videos over the years that I noticed that the early videos, his stuttering was noticeable but not objectionable, but very very easily detected. And in later years, I think the confidence that trusting, what we call Holy Spirit gave him, uh, psychologically, I think essentially kind of cured him of his stuttering. At least that's my interpretation of what I was detecting listening to his work over the years. Does that corroborate with
I
you?
agree because yeah,
Yeah.
listened to his early stuff when he's young and his
Uh-huh.
voice like lighter and even higher pitched and everything. And you're like, wow, is that Ken? But yeah, his stutter was a lot worse in the earlier days. And it's interesting because Dove had a really bad stutter when he was young as well. And of course, you really don't see any evidence of it, but he'll notice it occasionally that he
Hmm.
will be stuttering. So, and I think it's for Ken, he was just letting the Holy Spirit flow. And when the Holy Spirit's flowing, there's no stuttering going on.
Yep. Yep. And it may or may not manifest physically, but the calm is really the important factor, the inner calm, the inner peace that I think
Yeah,
it
Is it
becomes
okay if
possible.
I chime in too?
absolutely.
Dove also said that he stutters when he talks to Happy, his dog. And I
Oh,
think it's so relevant that in that childlike innocence, in that love space, when we can most be ourselves. And I just think of how many people condemned the child for stuttering or, tried to teach them out of it. And yet, in our holiest of being, we're totally accepted. I see Dove as being totally accepted by Happy, so he can revert to what he was born as. Does that make sense?
an interesting theory. Yeah.
It's
Oh, that's
beautiful to me, though.
yeah. It is. It is really sweet. And I think yeah, that it's all a manifestation of our thinking, whatever that may be. So and I think that's really sweet that the innocent dove, little innocent little David, which, as we've heard of his life, his he had some hard times too. So, but this is interesting. Um, thinking about Ken early in his life that, his beloved grandfather, his father, his mother, his father having tuberculosis, which is, that was a death sentence, back in those days. And even now it's kind of, come back in some places. But uh, it's just very interesting to hear that now that his mother has had an extremely severe skin condition. I would only think that probably be like psoriasis or something like that, which can be, can cause all sorts of terrible things. So, yeah, poor little Ken.
Do you want to continue, Lynn?
What's that?
Do you want to start that paragraph again?
Sure.
Okay, get a running start at it.
Okay. The stuttering one.
Yeah, that mine.
Okay.
My insecurity.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So my insecurity in those years was manifest in the stuttering, which began shortly after my grandfather's death, and recurring nightmares in which an activity would suddenly be interrupted and I would be thrown into a giant whirlpool, spun around wildly and completely out of control. I would awaken in a pool of sweat, absolutely terrified. There was also what would seem to be a major personality change. As a young child, I had been badly spoiled and was thought of as a quote unquote holy terror, always getting in everyone's way. After my grandfather's death, I became docile and good, sweet, good natured. This is so interesting. Sweet, good natured, and always ready to help others. Almost a model child. I was loved by almost everyone with whom I came into contact and had friends galore. On one level, at least, I saw to it that I would not be alone.
Mhm.
Ooh, that's a real interesting,
Mhm.
not, he didn't become a sweet, docile, good-natured child because he had a change or shift in his thinking. It was a survival thing. And when his grandfather, who he adored, was no longer there, he had to make sure that he would not be alone. That's really uh I see that in so many people and children, in their behavior, the things that they do in order to be accepted. Raphael talked to us about that, safe, accepted, and I cannot never remember the third one, but but it's all basically the same thing. Um, so I think that's very telling that he said that. On one level, at least, I saw to it that I would not be alone. But on a
Yeah,
deeper,
as you're saying that, I was thinking, well, in the last chapter of the text, there's that phrase, that just describes the ego as uncertain, lonely, and in constant fear, and that's I think, some of the defining characteristics of the ego thought system, and typically what we try to do is solve that on the level of form. And it sounds like Ken found a way to do that on that level, but evidently must have realized that there's got to be more to it than that. Because
yeah.
that really doesn't really get to the problem, root of the problem. Maybe he recognized that while he was doing it.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting, our theme of special relevance this time, with the uh lessons, is what is the ego.
Hmm.
And it's pretty well clear, the ego is just trying to be in control
Yeah.
in every way, in everything. And but it doesn't even actually exist. So these are great, the lessons, the lesson today about forgiveness being the solution to everything.
Hmm.
Uh, you know, and, you know, again, I used to read those lessons and think, oh, that's nice. That I can, I cannot disagree with that. That certainly makes sense to me. But now I look at it and go, oh, it just means I just need to let go of my investment in it, and it'll go away. Like, like, forgiveness doesn't mean, I have a change of heart about something. Forgiveness just means I recognize that what I thought happened didn't happen. I can let go of the investment in it and be free. Be free of all these crazy thoughts. So, how it became so simple when before it just seemed like such a mystery. How does that happen? Duh. I do it. I let it go. Anyway,
It's all on that little blue dot in Ken's chart, the decision-making mind that
yeah,
is ready to try an alternative to masochism and self-sabotage of peace, right?
yeah. Like, oh, I did this? Really? What was I thinking? And of course, yeah, there was no mind was not involved in it. It was all just dream. All right. So, but on a deeper level, Ken continues, I was always alone. And looking back over my life now, I see how God was keeping me for himself. Though before I could know him, I would first have to become strong inwardly and outwardly. And to accomplish this growth, I was sent a series of teachers through whom, over the 25 years which followed my grandfather's death, I developed the spiritual strength to grow closer to God until I would be able to live a life which centered totally about him, so that I might do his will, which would become mine as well. Uh, so, I don't know if this was his intention, or just he's mentioning that this was the result. Because obviously, to have an intention of living a life that's totally centered on God, uh, I mean, I've always had that intention, uh, but I've done a lot of things to make sure that that never happened too. So, uh, letting his will become mine as well,
Yeah.
is the key.
Yeah, yeah. I think that paragraph really spells out how, Ken, in looking back over, that first 30 years of his life, he says he's, on a deeper level, I was always alone, you know, meaning, if solving it apparently on the level of form, didn't do it. Looking back, I can see how God was keeping me for himself, though before I could know, I would first have to become strong inwardly and outwardly. But the inwardly is the strength that the course says that's the real solution because that's the cause, and the outward, may or may not be apparent on the level of form, but that's a result if or an effect rather than the root, right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So, wow. So I just was reading ahead a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and read.
Sure.
The first of these teachers was my grandfather himself, who remained extremely close to me for several years after his death. I thought of him often, and his name could not be mentioned in my company without bringing forth tears. I kept his hugely oversized slippers, which I wore for a year, and when finally yielding to pressure to give them up, I replaced them with slippers of a similar color. In an attempt to make his death more comforting to me, my mother had told me that my grandfather was in heaven. I must certainly have believed her because on at least one occasion that I recall, and I suspect many others as well, I had a clear image of my grandfather's face looking kindly down upon me from on high. Interesting. I remember being very comforted by that experience, and to this day I can recall the exact place and moment that it occurred.
Mm.
Oh, this is cool. This is going to be a cool story. At the age of 8, I began to enter the next major phase of my life. This was baseball and the Brooklyn Dodgers. In those years, the center of the baseball world was New York, and to most residents of Brooklyn, the center of the universe was the Dodgers, and they very rapidly became for me as well. By the age of 10, I lived and breathed according to how the Dodgers were doing. And though a strong fan of basketball, football, and hockey, the winter months consisted mainly of preparation for the spring and the onset of the baseball season. At some point during my 10th year, my attention focused specifically on one particular ball player, Duke Snyder, one of the Dodgers' big stars. I suspect the rather spectacular World Series he had just won against the Yankees had something to do with it. And we all know that that sports hero that we worship, I think about John Elway or I mean there's some really greats out there. So I almost literally worshiped him, and during his occasional batting slumps would become quite depressed. I pasted a picture of him on the wall by my pillow, and I prayed to him every night, giving him a good night kiss before going to sleep. By the time this teaching phase was drawing to a close, I had accumulated 9 scrapbooks of him. It would be difficult to overestimate the role Snyder played in my life. Without the very strong model he provided, I do not think I would have successfully survived the crucial 4 or 5 year period, which brought me to middle adolescence. Wow, that's really interesting that this baseball figure became like godlike to him, and that he would pray to him and um, just make scrapbooks of him. And like I was with the Beatles when I was, around that age,
Yeah,
probably.
I remember I had a friend that I had a wonderful chat with in a 50th high school reunion a few years ago, and he and I used to, whenever a new Beatles record would come out, he had a turntable in his room, and he and I put Heath kits together and soldered them and all that kind of stuff. But he put a Heathkit stereo together, and we I remember listening to what Rubber Soul, I think, and Revolver and all those,
Oh,
and we
gee.
we just say, wow, this is great stuff, and
Yeah.
yeah.
Worshipped him. I did. I was
Well,
like,
I still think that their music is pretty amazing,
it
and
is
considering
amazing.
the depth and breadth of it, kind of like taking that and then adding a few orders of magnitude, the depth and breadth. I actually have my favorite 3 adjectives to describe Ken Wapnick's work, and that is profound, prodigious, and prolific. And I think the Beatles in the musical realm certainly were in that uh, in that category somewhat. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, they were. And I mean that was what, made me, want to learn to meditate and listen
Yeah,
to
that's right.
the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi and look outside of the Catholic Church for, I mean, that was one of the things that spurred me out. So, yep, those 4, they
Yeah.
were fab. Yeah.
The Fab Four, and then now we have in my mind, the Fab Four would be Helen, Bill, Ken, and Judy, and at least I got to meet Judy and hang out with the folks at FIP for a while when I was redoing their website a decade or so ago. It's amazing. Time flies. Like, wow, that was about a decade ago that I started doing that. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Time flies.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is amazing. Yeah, but and those are our heroes, and now who are our new heroes that are coming up? Do we have any?
I,
You
I
know,
you know I think the course would suggest that if we can see the heroism in everyone,
yeah.
is that everyone's right mind. Last night, uh, my wife and I have been staying, mostly staying awake, putting on the American Revolution, not because it's in any way boring, but we tend to put it on at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and then start to doze off after a long day. But the American Revolution series with Ken Burns has just been wonderful. Nancy decided to call it a day about an hour before the last episode finished last night, but I watched to the end of it, and that 6th episode, if you haven't seen any of them, and want to just watch, I think the last half hour of the last episode was just very inspiring. But the heroism that was demonstrated by the founders of this country is offset and in stark contrast to the selfishness of everyone involved. And it's basically, it's just like it's another case study, a brilliantly done case study by Ken Burns and all his colleagues, of what the ego does and how it divides people, and what Holy Spirit does to bring people together, to the shared interest, the united states, and the uniting process. Obviously it's always going to be level confusion on the level of form, but why not try that if we can? And then it would be silly not to. In the same way, it'd be silly not to do the magic that helps us move away from fear. But to me, it was like an inspirational saga of what we call this country. If you take those ideals and really apply them where they really can work, which is on the level of the mind, then the freedom and the egalitarian ideals that the founders, that largely inspired by the transcendental movement that flourished in that era, it's like, well, it's quite fascinating and an inspiration to us right now. I mean, for any era, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't even know about that. Is that a series on
Oh, it's
Netflix or
wonderful.
something?
It's on PBS, and I think it's
Oh,
on Amazon as well. Anyways, but certainly you can find it on PBS and the PBS app and website. It's excellent. Six episodes, both all of which are I think 2 hours long, roughly. Ken Burns and a lot of great narrators with familiar names that you'll recognize when you see the credits roll. And incredible um, reenactments, fabulous paintings and maps, because obviously they can't do video interviews with any of the. There's no survivors left going back that far, but they have written accounts of the people that lived through that era, and just beautifully done, as in everything Ken Burns does. But
oh
I
yeah, Ken Burns.
highly recommend it, and it's just, I mean, it to me, one of the outstanding messages was that what we call the Civil War was really the second Civil War in this country, because the first one really was um, an astonishing outcome of the bedlam of so many different ethnicities and cultures, and the melting pot that America, rightly I think has been called. It really was demonstrated in this film, and how despite incredible differences and on the level of form, there was an element that was strong enough in the minds of everyone that was in this country to pull off something that became a country. And it's still a fragile, tenuous experiment, as we've seen in the politics of recent times. And anyway, without going off onto that
Yeah,
tangent too much more, but I highly recommend it. And it's just, to me, is always, if we can look with the Holy Spirit at those kinds of things, and really everything, we can see the playing out of the two thought systems, and how ego constantly drives for what's in it for me, whether you're a slave or a slave holder, whether you're an indigenous American or a colonist, or whether you're an empire builder or an empire escapee. It's all the same. We're all trying to do it on the level of form, and doing that level of confusion number. But there's a part of our mind that knows that the only way that's really ever going to work is if I become responsible for my own atonement, and
yeah,
look at my mind and see what I'm contributing to the outcomes that seem to be so important on the level form, but it's really the outcome of what choice am I making for which thought system, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I have to check it out because I had ancestors who fought in the Revolution. I also had ancestors that fought on both sides of the Civil War.
Uh-huh.
You have the ancestry or my heritage or my
Okay.
family search. Anyways, it's fascinating to see because they have like letters that soldiers wrote to their families, and these are my ancestors, and we're looking at them and thinking, wow, this took something to first off, it took something to come to a place like this and try to build the world,
Oh
and
yeah,
then
yeah.
um to decide, we're gonna keep it and fight for it, and go against the British Empire, which was like, I mean, that almost seems impossible, but they did.
Hmm.
And of course, you're talking about the revolution. I'm thinking about Hamilton, and
Yeah, and
in
it's interesting
Hamilton.
to factor in the Hamilton story that appeared on Broadway, and later on on the screen, the other screen. Yeah, and then as well as the two documentaries that came out a few years ago about Ben Franklin and his pivotal
Mhm.
role and all that, and just so many of the stories woven together. It's just brilliantly done. So I highly recommend the latest Ken Burns documentary on the American Revolution. It's just definitely worth watching. Yeah.
Very good. All right.
I think you'll enjoy it. Yeah,
We'll check it
it's
out.
challenging to watch too because you really see, the profound conflict in the minds of everyone involved.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and
That's
yet, and that's what
terrifying.
we're asked to look at with the course. It's like, well, I have to be willing to look at the stark insanity of my ego and see it projected regardless of what era I'm living in and what circumstances I seem to find myself in. It's all my own doing. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I'll have to, I told you my daughter she's over in Grand Junction at my son's house.
Uh-huh.
And, we miss her a lot, but she's usually, she always, we play games together. And so we bought a robot. We bought this little like a ball, little robot. And so she can control it from over there, and she can run around the house. She can, watch. Last night we watched a couple of shows together. We played some games together, all that kind of stuff. But we could watch that. That'd be kind of a cool thing to share. But we're still catching up on the last um uh uh edition of Survivor.
Oh,
So
okay.
forget the revolution. Let's go watch people.
Yeah, well, well, yeah, there's plenty of murderous brutality in what we call fantasy, but I think Ken and his crew Ken Burns and his crew do a marvelous job depicting very objectively and compassionately, you know, all the participants from the volunteers in the Continental Army to the Hessian soldiers that were imported and everyone involved and the stories and the heartfelt sentiments and the letters that were written and read aloud by the great narrations and the wonderful maps and the photography and obviously they had to use artifacts largely, but they did an incredible job and highly recommend
Amazing.
it.
And
Yeah.
he did the Civil War also, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, which
Yeah,
was
and now I'm
really,
almost tempted to go back and watch that again because it's been a
I
few years,
know,
and all the rest of his documentaries because
I
they've
know
all been
he's
really
so
good.
amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
Rafi has his hand up. Yeah, Rafi.
What all of this reminds me of is that these people, with their obsessive dedication to freedom and what they were willing to go through and made themselves go through to obtain freedom,
Hmm.
is the same as parallel to my dedication to freedom.
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
mean, the examples are everywhere.
Yep.
Not only in that revolution, in the War of 1812 is the same thing. And the Civil War, the dedication to freedom, the dedication to freedom. It keeps coming back over and over again. Well, isn't that what I'm doing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I'm
Exactly.
doing by staying on these courses, by following the release technique and the Sedona method and everything else I can get my hands on.
Yeah. And I think the course reminds us.
The
Oh,
parallel was so obvious; it just jumped off. It just jumped out at me. So I
yeah.
just thought I'd share that. Thank
Oh,
you.
thanks, Rafi. Yeah, as you're saying that, I was thinking, and what I think is we're so fortunate to have the course to remind us that 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 intrinsic universal urge for true freedom really is misplaced if we focus our efforts on the level of form instead of beginning to realize that the ultimate answer, that the solution, the real solution to the problem is that nothing happened and I need to go vertical instead of horizontal. Instead of trying to replace illusion A with illusion B or C or D ad infinitum, I need to get above the battlefield of differences and separation and solve the problem where its solution is complete, where we realize that we're dreaming, and that's the only ultimate solution for freedom is waking up from the dream of slavery that we've
Yeah,
imprisoned
well,
ourselves
Lester
with.
Levinson said, we're all looking for it, but a lot of us are looking for it in the dream, in the world where it isn't.
Exactly. Yeah.
And 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 all of this reminded me of that. And also when he had this whole thing about the Brooklyn Dodgers and Duke Snyder, that was my childhood.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
I
So you
didn't
can
get
relate, huh?
scrapbooks and stuff like that, but the Dodgers and the Duke, they were big deals to me. And,
Yeah.
and Jackie Robinson and Pee Wee Reese and all of those guys, my God,
Uh-huh.
that was my life back then. It's
Yeah.
astounding how the parallel is. Whoa. Anyway, I'll shut up.
Oh, that's
That's
great. That's
amazing.
fun.
Yeah,
That's fun to have that relate to. Yeah.
I know. And just think you were watching the same games that Ken was watching. So I love this. All right. So we've just been reading about this connection that he had with the Dodgers and with Duke Snyder that helped him to get through um uh, a, a very troubled childhood. Um and then he begins to get to middle adolescence. He says the period began to draw to a close after the 1955 season when I was 13. Snyder had a particularly good year and another impressive series against the Yankees. And this year, for the first time in their history, the Dodgers won the World Series. Moreover, I had been present at 3 of their 4 series victories, including the final game. Riding home alone on the crowded subway after that glorious victory, I was aware, however, that something was missing. I was forced to admit to myself that deep down, the series did not really matter.
Oh
Ooh.
no, Mr. Bill.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. Uh, um, and that I was feeling even somewhat depressed. I could certainly not understand it, especially since this was the greatest moment in Brooklyn Dodger history. And I had been there. And that evening, when my parents helped me to celebrate by opening a bottle of champagne, I recall feeling somewhat hypocritical about the whole thing because he knew the truth. This is great. Also, about this time, I began to realize that baseball could not be all that important, nor in my moments of elation or
Oop,
sadness that meaningful for
okay.
within a couple of us, nor how many hits Snyder had gotten, had hit. And moreover, I realized that this response had always been true for me. And I recognize too that a lot of times we experience these experiences because we share them with people and have conversations. And what about this? And did you see this? And so because he was in this place where he felt so alone, he wasn't sharing these thoughts with a lot of other people. And so he
Right.
wasn't really experiencing the continued uh, joy of that happening.
Mhm.
So it's interesting that he's realizing this is 1955. He was a teenager. He says there were still 1 or 2 or more years of active baseball left in me, but it was waning. And when the Dodgers left Brooklyn for the West Coast in 1957, I did not even attend the final game played at Ebbets Field, which was soon to be torn down. How fleeting earthly temples are. Wow. All right.
Yep.
So here he is, a teenager, and he says, about this time, I read a book which decisively influenced the future course of my external life. The book was A Freudian Primer by Calvin Hall, and I knew from that moment on I would be a clinical psychologist. Though only a junior in high school, I devoured as much as I could on Freud and the Freudians, both primary and secondary sources. And it was not until several years after I received my doctorate that I ever deviated from the decision I had made while still in high school.
We can pause there for just a moment.
Yes.
I think that that book that he's referencing uh, was mentioned in a course study group that I was in this past week or so, and by a friend in Australia who has quite well read, and he was saying that really profoundly influenced him too, and along with other classical works, but he also studied with some non-dual Advaita gurus, as he calls them in India. And anyway, yeah. But Freud is such a huge influence, as we're reading on Ken's work and his life, that um, yeah, I think we're really uh, indebted to Freud as well as Ken, because, as Ken points out, Freud really laid the foundation for the course, and without his pioneering work, the course would have a much more flimsy foundation and it really probably wouldn't have happened, given the context of how it came through.
Yeah, yeah. And it's so interesting to me too, because the whole thing with Freud and Jung,
Mhm.
and Jung, what the things that I've seen and heard of Jung were so right on with the Course in Miracles as far as the worldview. And it's interesting. It would be interesting to me to see if he had been influenced by Jung instead of Freud, what kind of what kind of thinking would have been going on. But also interesting.
Yeah. I think
So
Ken does refer to Jung in some of his work, and I think, I hope I'm not, misrepresenting what I remember him saying, but it was something to the effect that, Jung's work really didn't get to the cause uh, in the mind, and in terms of the decision maker, but it was really still working on a lower level of some sort. I'm paraphrasing that. I probably, need to question what I just
yeah, I don't know
but I
either.
need to go back and see if I can find where he talked about Jung. But I mean, there's lots of great stuff that he did, but I think in the context of the course, what Freud did to help us expose the insanity of the ego, and instead of trying to solve the problem on this level, was pioneering. And then the comment that Ken has made in at least a few of his works, he said, Freud, referring to the ego, knew a bad thing when he saw it. He just didn't know it wasn't real. Meaning, we made up the ego. So that's where. But I think, well, I seem to recall that, Jung's work was, which very little that I've studied of either of them really seems like it's mostly about archetypes and collective unconscious and that sort of thing. Which, if it's taken out of the context of that's all in my mind, it can be maybe less helpful. I don't know. Just a
Yeah,
thought.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I don't know. I'm not a psychologist, so I've only read some stuff and seen videos. So,
You're not
hey,
a psychologist. You just play one on TV. Is that it?
that's right. I just play one on TV. So,
Okay.
okay. So you want to read for a while?
Sure. Sure. I'll start that paragraph over. At, I don't think we finished that paragraph. Yeah, okay. At about this time, I read a book which decisively influenced the future course of my external life. The book was a Freudian primer by Calvin Hall, and I knew from that moment on I would be a clinical psychologist. Though only a junior in high school, I devoured as much as I could on Freud and the Freudians, both primary and secondary sources. It was not until several years after I received my doctorate that I ever deviated from the decision I, in quotes, had made while still in high school. And we did finish that paragraph. Okay. It was also while in high school that the seeds were sown for the next, quote, stage, unquote, of my education. Uh, I'm giggling because someone in a study group yesterday commented on people who put quote, say the quotes aloud. I do that because sometimes people, um, if they're listening to a replay, might not realize that, the quotes sometimes connote and convey, uh, like a question of the assumptions about the word, kind of thing. Anyway, so having said that, I will continue. A stage which was to last for many years. Neither of my parents nor their own families had ever had any strong intellectual interests, but my mother did occasionally enjoy the arts. While I was in high school, she joined a couple of classical record clubs, and so I began to be exposed to classical music. My interest developed slowly, excuse me, and at first centered on the more popular works, especially those which contained themes I knew from the other sources. An introductory gift to one of the clubs was the Toscanini performances of Beethoven's 9 symphonies. I recall on that occasion I would play all 9 just about nonstop, and I guess Beethoven rapidly became my favorite, easily outdistancing the more melodic Tchaikovsky. Until and I actually made a blog post about a decade ago of some of the music that inspired Ken. I think it was like like a 2015 blog post. Anyway, if you go to acimblog.com and put in Beethoven or Mozart, you can find the post pretty quickly. Some of the links I don't think are valid, and I probably should go through and fix them. But if you're interested in some of the works that deeply inspired Ken in terms of classical music, particularly Beethoven and some Mozart and a few others. That blog post has some of that, and in particular, the ones that I listened to after he talked about them at some length were the late quartets of Beethoven, and they're really quite profound. I mean, I think Ken, I have to say, in addition to the central benefit of listening to Ken and watching and reading his work for so many years now, um, has been, understanding the course, but a peripheral thing which also complements and I think bolsters and buttresses the understanding of the course is his connections to and use of supporting work from Freud and Plato and Beethoven and some of those giants in our cultural history. Yeah. So my interest developed slowly and at first centered on the more popular works. Oh, I did finish that paragraph. Okay. Until about my second year in college, I had a distinct aversion to singing, particularly opera. I'm still working on that, I guess. But, but hearing a performance of Carmen at the Metropolitan Opera House, quote, the Met, unquote, changed my mind, and it was not long before I was, quote, hooked, unquote. I began going to the Met as often as I had gone to Ebbets Field. And as my college was only a short 2 hours from New York, there were no great traveling difficulties. While I loved Verdi and Puccini, I was still too young for Mozart. It was Wagner who captured my soul. It was not only his music which exercised such a hold over me, but his life as well. I went to his operas as often as I could and read everything I could find about him. I think I ended up reading Newman's classic 4-volume biography no fewer than 3 times. Wagner clearly was the dominant figure in my life for the last 2 college years and the beginning of graduate school. The power and beauty of his music and the strength of his life were the primary nourishes of my soul. Well, there we have it. Do you want to pick up from there?
Sure. During my college years, music played another important role in my life. It kept the part of me interested in psychology honest. I had gone through my Freudian period, which strangely enough for a while overlapped with a strong attraction for Skinner, the foremost behaviorist. But much as I was drawn to their theories, I knew there was something important that was missing. And that something else I found in music, particularly Wagner, but also in Mozart and Beethoven, though I knew their worlds were still beyond me. What I experienced while listening to their music was not explicable by all the theories I had read or even liked. There was something more these theories could not explain. I could not either, but I knew it was important. The culmination came, I guess, when I heard a lecture given by Skinner himself. In answering a question from the audience, he stated that given the opportunity, he could make a Mozart. I did not yet know who God was, but I certainly knew that Mozarts were not humanly created, nor their music that of earthly inspiration.
Can we
And
pause for a moment there? Oh, go
yeah,
ahead.
I like to pause for a moment there
Yeah.
because, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, as he's saying that, I mean, I remember studying B.F. Skinner in school, I think like even grade school a bit and certainly college psychology classes. And I remember thinking about how banal and depressing that whole theory was that, that we're, that the claim that we're, either the product of what was a nature and nurture, basically we're really just robotic machines. And of course, on the level of form, if when we're basically subjects of the tyrannical ego, that's pretty much a fair assessment. but it totally discounts the idea that we have a mind that can attend to spirit and identify with a non-dual awareness. And without that, it's life really is meaningless. And I think that's what I was objecting to. And I'm flashing on something else that I think relates. Is I remember, a required course was or a required book in one of my high school classes, I think it was Lord of the Flies, and I don't know if anybody's ever read
Oh,
that, but
geez.
I remember thinking, God, what a despicable and depressing account of the ugliness of human nature and selfishness and murderousness, really. And I was thinking, well, gee, watching the American Revolution, you got to see that. Watching all the murder mysteries that my wife and I've been sitting on a fair number of those just because they're on in the evening and my wife likes to watch them. And it's like, well, that's watching the news. Watching anything in the world, you get to see those two thought systems. But the the, the phrase that epitomizes Helen and Bill's foundation is, there must be a better way. And I think that's what Ken is getting to here. There must be something more than just being a mere robot. And the initial thought I had after you finished that paragraph was what the adoration and the fawning all over AI in our current culture, think, oh, this is going to be the solution to everything. And I'm an enthusiast, but I'm also cautious in my uh, approach to it, in the sense, not that I'm not going to try it, and I have been dabbling with it for several years in different capacities, but I think if we think that that's going to somehow elevate our minds uh, and provide something that we can't find on our own, I think it's really very pertinent to what Ken just wrote here, and that it's not the world that's going to do it for us. It's got to come from within, and the genius is outside the mechanical parroting of form. And another fellow course student that I connect with frequently, um, Abe. He has studied AI in somewhat greater depth and is technically savvy, and he calls AI a stochastic parrot,
Yes.
meaning it's a probabilistic machine that in terms of the text anyway, but I think the graphics as well, is basically predicts what the next pixel should be, the next word should be, and so forth, and does a brilliant job. But it's still basically, um, a mechanistic process, no matter how sophisticated. But that's what every ego is it's just an outpicturing or a projection of our mechanical ego minds, which are intrinsically dualistic and therefore warlike and murderous and insane. And so, we're not going to solve the world's problems with any technology, but other than, if you want to call Holy Spirit a technology, which I think is a
Yeah.
disservice to it. Yeah,
Well, the fact is, Bruce, AI is not intelligence.
exactly. Yeah,
It
it's
is a relational database
beautifully
it's a
stated. Yes.
vast relational
Yeah.
database that
Yep.
has
Yep.
been populated with data, and
Yeah.
a lot of that data is skewed. A lot
Right.
of that data doesn't even exist. People just
And,
there are people out there putting stuff in there,
yeah.
and
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 woefully incomplete, even on the level that it's assumed to be brilliant, which in some cases it seems to be, and yeah.
but will it ever be intelligent? How?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, Robert. It's a tool.
Yeah.
It will never be intelligent, but it's just, your phone has AI.
Yeah.
It'll predict what you're going to say next when you're doing a text.
Exactly. And
And
that
all you have to do, yeah,
the classic quote that comes to mind, and I'll close with that since I've got another meeting to go to, as usual. But is there intelligent life on Earth? Right?
yeah. I love it.
Well, from the
Thank you,
from
Bruce.
the perspective of the course, the ego, you know, is insane. So you could say it's intelligent, but insane intelligence is kind of uh, rather conflicted, to say the least. And back to our
Yeah,
work lesson for today. So anyway, thanks, Lynn, as always. I savor our weekly 1 hour conversations, and look forward to picking up where we left off.
Absolutely. I love you, Bruce, and thank you so much.
Graduate school account from Ken. Yeah, thanks. Have a beautiful week, everyone, and look forward to the next conversation.
All right. Thank you so much, Bruce. And yeah, we'll look forward to